like Rachel said, I thought that maybe there would be 3 people here and that my whole talk would be me crying for 20 minutes. So thank you for showing up. We're going to talk about death. I'm sure you're all uncomfortable. That's good. The 9 Contemplations of Atisha. Contemplations on Death. Contemplation 1. All of us will die sooner or later. So it was almost exactly 3 years ago. It was the day after Thanksgiving, 2014, that my family received a very terrible piece of information. 3 weeks earlier, my stepmom had been walking up the steps to the front door, and she had fell and hurt herself, and the pain in her hip just wouldn't go away. So she went to the doctor, and they did an x-ray, and they found a very large tumor on her hip. So they immediately sent her to get more tests, and it was the day after Thanksgiving that our family learned that she had stage 4 terminal cancer. It had started out as breast cancer, and at this point, it had spread all throughout her body. It was in her liver, in her kidneys, in her lymph nodes, and it had even gone to her brain. My stepmom came into my life when I was 12, and she, in a lot of ways, saved my life. She was a mentor and a provider of great love and stability. So for me personally, it was extremely devastating and extremely heartbreaking, as it was, of course, for our entire family. So, that's a lot to take in. And so for a few weeks, our family was just sort of absorbing that information. And at this point, I was already doing hospice volunteer work, and I knew that I wanted to be a death doula and assist people while they were dying. And so I knew how important it was for us to start talking about it and start preparing. So I went up to my stepmom and my father, and I tried to have the conversation, and immediately their walls went up, and they were so uncomfortable, and they were not ready to have that conversation. So I waited, I waited a few more weeks, and I brought it up again. And again, their walls went up, and they were not able to have that conversation. And I continued to do this. I would continue to wait a few weeks, and then try this angle, and then maybe try that angle, and I kept trying, and every single time, walls. Because my stepmom wasn't planning on this. She was 59 at the time. She didn't think she was going to die. She thought she had another 15 to 20 years left. So she was not at all ready for that. And so time went on, and suddenly here we are. It's spring of 2015. She had gotten radiation for her brain, for the brain tumors. She tried a new form of chemotherapy and had a horrible allergic reaction and was in the hospital on the edge of death. And I was terrified because we did not have those conversations. And I didn't know what she wanted. None of us knew. And I was so worried she was going to die and we wouldn't know what to do. Because what happened at some point is I stopped trying to have those conversations. Their discomfort made me so uncomfortable that I didn't even want to try anymore. And at some point, I realized that I couldn't force them to have that conversation if they weren't ready. Contemplation number 3. Death will come whether you are prepared or not. There was a lady who worked with the dying for 8 years, and during this time, she listened, and she listened deeply. And she kept hearing them express their regrets, and she started to notice themes, that there was the same themes emerging over and over and over again. So she wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And among these regrets are the regret of having worked too hard, The regret of not having expressed emotions more often. The regret of not staying in contact with friends. The regret that they didn't realize that happiness was a choice, and they didn't make the choice. But do you know what the number one regret of the dying is? The number one regret of the dying is that they did not live a life true to themselves. The number one regret of the dying is that they did not live a life true to themselves. And why do you think that is? Fear, right? Fear is a big part of it. Fear of letting people down. Fear of going outside of the box. Fear of taking risks. Fear. And what is fear? Fear is a negative emotion caused by the belief that someone or somebody is going to be dangerous, painful, or threatening. It's the anticipation of something that hasn't happened yet, and we're worried that it's going to harm us. And so I want to bring the idea of fear back to death. We live in a culture that is not only afraid of death, death has become a phobia. It is so tremendous that we will not look at it, we will not talk about it, and a lot of people won't even think about it. So how do we prepare for something that we're all going to experience if we can't even do these basic things? And I can't help but wonder, what does this do to our psyches? All of us know that we're going to die. We all know that. But when we walk around in life holding this fear in the back of our minds, not willing to look at death, how does that affect our life? How does that affect our daily life? Is it possible that that fear bleeds into other areas? And personally, I think that this tremendous fear, this phobia of death that we have in this culture, has a relationship to the culture of fear that we have in this country. I really do. I really believe that. And I do think it impacts our psyches tremendously. So my question for you is, what are you avoiding? And where is fear holding you back? But I do have a practice that I want to share. It's the practice of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, which helps to move through fear and uncomfortable emotions. Contemplation number 2. Your lifespan is decreasing continuously. So the practice of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, it's actually very, very simple. What it comes down to is that when a negative emotion arises, first of all, we notice it. We notice it in our body. We observe the fact that we're feeling really uncomfortable, and we make the choice to sit there and be with our discomfort. We don't try to avoid it. We don't push it away. We don't run away from it. We don't distract ourselves. We make the conscious decision to just be in that moment of discomfort. And then that moment, it passes. So let me give you a real life example. Let's say that you're in a relationship and you have determined that that relationship needs to come to an end. And you start thinking about the conversation you need to have with your partner, and you are terrified. You're so worried about what their response is going to be. Are they going to start crying? Are they going to get angry? Then you start thinking about being single again and being alone, and you start to be scared about being lonely. And maybe you share finances with this person, and you're like, how am I going to make it on my own? How am I going to pay my bills? And you get so worried that you avoid that conversation, and you stay in that relationship much longer than you should. You're not doing yourself any favors, you're not doing your relationship any favors, and you're certainly not doing your partner any favors. So let's look at that same situation and apply the practice of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Same thing, you're in a relationship and you know that the relationship needs to come to an end. And you notice when you start thinking about it that your stomach gets super tight and you get this feeling of dread. And then you start thinking about the conversation you need to have with your partner and your throat starts to tighten. And as you're imagining all these things, all these feelings are going through your body, and you kind of just breathe through it, and you consciously just stay there with the feelings. And then you work up the courage, and you go and you have the conversation with your partner. And it doesn't go great. They do respond, they do get really upset, and you get upset. But as that's happening, you consciously choose to stay there with it. You choose to be with those emotions, with that discomfort, present in that moment with your partner. And eventually what happens is you get through the other side of that, and everything's okay. Yeah, there was a period there where it did not feel good, but you get through the other side and you realize everything is okay. And so the practice of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, what this does is it helps you to increase your capacity for discomfort. The more you consciously choose in those moments to just let yourself be in discomfort, you increase your capacity for discomfort and you become stronger and you increase your courage because you're more willing to take risks and face your fear because you learn through experience that when you sit there and let things feel uncomfortable, that it passes. Those feelings pass and you're okay. So it is a really, for me, honestly, in the top 3 life-changing things I've learned, honestly. It is important for life, for living. As a creative person, that involves lots of risk-taking. It involves thinking outside of the box, doing things that haven't been done before, and fear can hold people back. So using this practice helps with that, and it's really important for death because death happens around us all the time. And a lot of us don't know how to show up for somebody when they've experienced a great loss. We don't know what to do when people are grieving. We don't know what to do for ourselves when we're grieving because it makes us so uncomfortable, and we haven't learned those skills in this culture. And when that time comes for us, the fact that we've helped teach ourselves how to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable will help for when that time does come. Contemplation number 7. Your loved ones cannot keep you from death. So, going back to the spring of 2015 when my stepmom was in the hospital, something pretty miraculous happened. She actually rebounded and she lived for another 2 years. And during that time, my father and her both got comfortable with death because they were living with it on a daily basis. And we were finally able to have those conversations. And me, I'm like a very organized, schedule-oriented person, so I created a checklist. And every Monday evening for just 1 hour, we would work and go through the checklist and address all the things that we needed to address. What were we going to do with her belongings? What did she want if she was, getting near death, and all of it. And so on Monday, May 8th, at 7:05 p.m. this year, my stepmom died. And in the weeks leading up to her death, she was in her home, in her bedroom, as she had wanted. And in the days leading up to her death, we did what she wanted. There was fresh yellow roses and fresh lavender on her dresser. She was lying with her favorite stuffed animal, holding her prayer beads with her cats on her lap. Her friends and her family came. They would read Mary Oliver poems and other books that she had with readings. And at 7:05 p.m., I was outside in the garden, and one of her friends was with her, and they came and got me and told me that she had stopped breathing. And I came into the bedroom, and she had, in fact, stopped breathing, and she was dead. And so I called her hospice nurse, who she was very close with, and he came and he pronounced her death. What didn't happen, which is what normally happens, is that the funeral home did not come and whisk her body away. One thing that most people do not know, and it's so unfortunate, is that is actually not required. You can spend time with your loved one after they die. There is no law or nothing that says that their body has to be taken away. So later that evening, the woman I work with, Caroline, who's been doing home funerals for over 20 years, she came over and we did a ritual cleansing with essential oils of my stepmom's body. We put her in her wedding dress as she had requested. And that night, our family got to spend time with her. And I held her hand for what would be the last time. And of course it was difficult, but it was also beautiful, and I could absorb the fact that she had died. I could just sit there and be with her and absorb the fact that she had died. And the next morning, my dad got to spend time with her alone, and at 12 p.m. the next day, the funeral home came and took her away. And 3 days later, that Friday, I attended her cremation. And then 2 weeks later, her closest friends and our family, we gathered at the green cemetery that I work at. And over her grave, my father and my two brothers and I, we took turns mixing her ashes with the soil and with a soil amendment and putting it in the grave. And afterward, we planted a native flame azalea. And everyone who had attended took a yellow rose, her favorite, and we made a circle around her grave. My stepmom got to have the death that she wanted. If she had died in that hospital, she would not have, because she was not ready and she was not prepared. Do not wait until death comes knocking on your door to take your mortality seriously. Do not wait. Start planning and start preparing now. And start with the practice of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Have those conversations with your loved ones. It's difficult, but have those conversations. And start looking into your options and thinking seriously about what you want. And let's take some lessons from the dying and their regrets. Play more and don't work so hard. Express your emotions more often. Stay in contact with your friends. Choose happiness. And above all, live a life that is true to who you are. I dedicate this talk to my stepmother, Karen, and to the liberation of all beings. May we awake. Thank you.